Danila, TruNiQ, Polymordvinov is a player who grabbed my attention whilst playing with Team Space. This roster has been upsetting a lot of bettors, taking scalps in Tier 2 where they really shouldn't be. One of the most important aspects to their play and how they're really managing to outperform these sorts of teams is TruNiQ. This young man has been impressive from the first moment I watched this team, so I knew I had to make a profile about him here on Prospects. It's generally a risk to pick a player from deep within the CIS scene, but the last time I did, it was fame, and well, I'm ready to risk it again. He is TruNiQ, I am KingT, and this is Prospects. Let's start where every half starts. Pistols. With the increased importance of the first round, teams are going to want to hone in on talented clickers. On both sides of the game, TruNiQ is able to frag out with consistency in pistol play. His Glock play is highly assertive, often taking point and leading the charge for his team. He's really responsive with his flicks, and his headshot accuracy is incredible, so it makes sense for him to take up these spots. Natural playmakers don't really need much to get their motor revving, so it makes sense for TruNiQ to try and go find that initial outburst quite early on. The USP also rings true for TruNiQ more often than not, often taking down multiple bodies. I would say that his CT pistols often don't look as flashy and as impactful as his T-size ones, but that's more to do with the positions he plays. We'll obviously get more into that later in the video. Onto the meat and potatoes of the game, where TruNiQ does the majority of his work. Rifling is a bit like skinning a cat. There are multiple ways to go about it. Now TruNiQ takes a lot of long-range fights, and he does so primarily with tap and spray. His spray is solid rather than elite in these ranges, which can be an issue. In some demos I've also seen him do this weird sort of double and triple tap bursting, but it's not really something we see too often. I think it's more like he's not feeling himself quite in that moment, and that's what he's resorting to. Thankfully this style, even if it is when he's not feeling confident that he's using it, it goes really well with his natural tapping ability and flicks, so I'd say it's actually quite often pretty optimal. Now with TruNiQ often taking up more closing roles, I think it's quite impressive to see the skill set he has available. Quite often teams in this sort of area of the game, their closers are more reliable decision makers, perhaps more experienced players, considering these are tier 2 players who, as up-and-comers, don't really have the nous and the nuance of a more experienced player, so maybe don't have quite the same mechanical brilliance. In that sense, TruNiQ is definitely an exception. Being explosive allows him to make huge plays in the mid to late rounds, turning singles into doubles like a sloppy bartender. Due to his roles and positions, TruNiQ is often called upon to be a closer, and thankfully he seems to be fairly composed in these situations. His clutch rate isn't particularly special, sitting at just over 1.5%, but he's constantly winning the rounds he should be. Rarely does he let a 1v1 slip away, allowing space to really capitalise in these intense, high-pressure moments. Right, let's resolve that little cliffhanger from earlier. Why doesn't TruNiQ frag quite as explosively on CT-sided pistols? Quite simply, our featured player plays a lot of big sight anchor positions that are often smoked off and typically spots you don't really want to challenge from anyway. They're places you want to delay from, fall back, and hold for a retake. On Mirage, he's sat in CT, and on Ancient, he plays A-Site and Donut. These are the two most classic maps in their map pool. Some other maps don't seem as explicit in this sort of role bias, but this is where we see the majority of his play come from. Now, you may see younger, more impatient players try to get ahead of the utility that's coming down in an execute to try and go get those kills, but TruNiQ is more than happy to play for the retake. In this sense, going for the optimal play and making the right moves is what he likes to do on CT sides in general. He's going to keep himself alive, and he's going to wait for backup before committing to a fight. Even once the cavalry arrives, he still likes to take things slow, preferring to act as the janitor mopping up everything, rather than being the player creating all the mess. As we briefly touched on earlier, this is where he really shines, picking the right angles and making the right plays to allow his team to pick up round after round. All of this makes him quite an effective anchor, and he rarely gives his life away, and always gives his team the best possible chance to win. Some of this may seem like I'm painting him as a beta though, and that would be a disservice to him. He does have a number of tricks up his sleeves to contribute to the rounds, beyond just playing at the back of the retake pack and taking all the glory. One of the favourite ones I spotted in the demo was the classic self-smoke in CT on A-side Mirage. He creates a gap for himself to work off and catch players trying to get into deeper positions when they're executing onto his site. There are some examples of TruNiQ getting his hands dirty early, though they are few in number. When Space run a set play to try and get a critical piece of real estate, it makes sense to involve their best technicians. Here we see the more explosive TruNiQ getting out in space and running people over. All in all, you'll see him make his best plays in retakes and rotates, as he seems able to assess and react to these scenarios very quickly. You'll very often see rounds where he'll rotate into an area, assess what needs to be done and what's actually currently happening, grab a double kill, and swing the round completely into his team's favour. This ability is what really draws me to him, as even when the script gets sent up in flames, he's always completely unfazed. I do feel like mentioning this, even though it's perhaps not entirely fair. There was a CT side against Spirit, which was, wow, he got ruthlessly terrorised by Donk, and honestly, you've got to feel bad for the guy. He was basically matched up with Donk all game long, and if you've ever had to hold an angle against Donk, you'd understand it's a near impossible task, and he got absolutely mercilessly killed just over and over again. The T side went slightly better, but the overall 4-10 matchup really told the whole story. Just felt like sharing that. That was a little fun tidbit from the demos I watched. Alright, let's begin with the T side elephant in the room here. TruNiQ's exact role can be quite hard to pin down. Space's T side seems to be set up in a way to best make both Fozzel and TruNiQ comfortable. We seem to alternate which one will be an early contact sort of pack player, and which one will be a hard lurker. Now the main difference between the two of them is that we know TruNiQ is being set up to try and make a play in the late round. Whilst Fozzel may be more of a hard lurker on certain maps, he's still more likely to go and risk his life in the mid round, whilst TruNiQ is typically allowed to bait a little bit, stay towards the back, and be there in the post plant. Now let's start with the pack play side of things, where TruNiQ is usually set up for his late rounds by taking map control. He's a part of the pack, quite often leading the way, actually on the initial engagement where it's the most favourable fight for him with the flashbangs and everything in place. He's only one tip of a two-headed spear. You'll often have someone like N0 there to take the main aggro and allow him to have a little more space to breathe and find his kills. Now once taken, TruNiQ has the option to just linger in this space and take his fights and then make deeper plays. It's a little less common, it depends on the opponents, but you'll see him just dig himself in like a tick that's almost impossible to remove. It'll cost you at least 2 lives, and often doesn't really feel worth it. What I do enjoy is that he will often choose to fall off and regroup after establishing an advantage, should that have been possible. If he finds nothing, he's also quite likely to make that retreat. Now the other way they try and keep him alive into the late rounds is a more traditional old school lurk. Most commonly this is seen on Vertigo, where there are rounds where TruNiQ will just literally sit and hold passive in mid, not even really try and make any sort of play until the final execute happens. At times he will try to act as a second point of contact, or use his util from mid to assist, for example, a B-site take, to try and get his own team out. He's a constant thorn in the CT side in these rounds, because he's either trying to make the lurk himself and actually push up through mid and find a dry fight, or he's just throwing util from way back in mid, not allowing the CTs a single moment to gather their thoughts, as they've always got to worry about this guy who's just lingering around mid, who could at any moment shoot them in the back, even if he doesn't end up making the play in time. Oftentimes if he was on a hard lurk, or even if he was a passive member of the pack, he does tend to close out the round by approaching the bomb site, planting, and then getting himself into a good spot. Again, we see a great display of his understanding of the game, as he rarely gives anything away, and he makes the most of his opponent's mistakes time and time again. Alrighty, let's wrap this up like a portion of chips. TruNiQ is a tidy little player. Not too many frills, but loads of positive qualities to enjoy. His mechanics are quite solid, and honestly, everything I've seen leads me to believe he could play a number of different roles on a team if so required. The way a lot of, sort of Russian-specific teams seem to be structured right now means that riflers do have to be jacks of all trades. They've got to be able to do a little bit of lurking, take entry when they need to, be a trader, and just overall be a skilled rifler. It's quite clear why he's currently closing and anchoring though, as that's really what's, at least what I can see, his temperament seems to lean towards. If this can be transferred to a high level of play remains to be seen, as the room for error and where really the standard to which your decision making is tested is completely different in Tier 1 than it is in Tier 2 games. His struggles in that Spirit series do pretty much show us that there is still some things to work out, even if that was perhaps the roughest matchup you could possibly find in Tier 2 right now. We saw some moments where maybe he could have outthought rather than outfought. Hopefully some of you get that differentiation. Donk in certain spots, so hopefully we'll see a little more growth in that area. I'm overall excited about TruNiQ, and I really hope he makes the most of the opportunities presented to him in the coming years. Thank you for watching, I'm KingT, So if you want to see more, and leave a like and a comment, of course, so it's appreciated. And yeah, let me know your thoughts about this guy. I really thought I found a gem when I first spotted his gameplay. And honestly, deeper examination, as well as my general assessment of the Russian scene, showed me that he's probably going to be around for a little while, so watch this space. Alright, we'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.